So, my name is KBaker, and I am going to be sharing with you some tips and tricks for developing your own story to tell in a StorySlam. Um, I work as a community inclusion specialist with the Temple University Collaborative on Community Inclusion. And the collaborative's work is focused on full and meaningful community participation of individuals with serious mental illnesses and receives funding as a national rehabilitation and training center from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Um, and while this workshop session is usually offered in person through Zoom, I wanted to make a recording to offer it to anyone who would like to view it in their own time. And I have my contact information at the end of the presentation. I'd love to hear from you about what made you interested in these workshops and who you are, just anything you want to share. All right, so the impact of storytelling. Research suggests that telling stories is good for our health because developing stories and sharing them with others can help us to understand ourselves by deepening our sense of identity. Storytelling can increase self-esteem. It helps us to connect with each other and build a sense of community. One of the most powerful aspects of storytelling is that it allows us to take another person's perspective. So, if you are unfamiliar with StorySlams, I will tell you about them. A StorySlam is a live storytelling competition where storytellers have 5 minutes, usually, to tell a story that they've developed based on a theme that's chosen for the event. And the collaborative's goal is to host virtual StorySlams during the stay-at-home orders due to the COVID-19 pandemic, so that we can all come together online at the same time and share our stories with one another. So, what makes a good story? Well, these are a few elements that I always come back to when I'm developing a story. The story must be about you. If you're developing a story for a StorySlam, it certainly will involve other people or characters, but you should be the main character. And it should be as specific as it can be. So you would want to recall a specific moment or moments in time and identify who was there when this moment happened, where you were, and what exactly you were doing. So these things can really help you to focus on the actions and the events that make up the story rather than sort of feelings and emotions, which are certainly important. However, when a person shares actions and events, which is, what storytelling is, it allows the audience or the listeners of your story to sort of put themselves in your shoes and imagine the emotions and feelings that were tied to those events. So, more elements. There must be something at stake. Every good story identifies what there is to gain or lose. That's a very important part of developing a powerful, compelling story. And there must be a change in the protagonist. So the protagonist being you, what change did you go through? And how did the events you describe in the story cause you to change? So it's also helpful to think about some of your own favorite stories. A couple of mine are, I just read the novel Little Fires Everywhere, and I've also been watching the TV show, and I think it's just a fantastic story. It really digs into different identity roles and relationships and circumstances. And another person identified the movie Just Mercy as a good story. So think about your own favorite stories. It could be a book, a play, a movie, a TV show, and think about what is it about those stories that makes you think they're really good? And see if you can identify any of those elements that we just went through in your favorite stories. Okay, tying in themes. So the theme for our first Story Slam on May 7th is long distance connections. And this, it sometimes can be tricky to tie a theme into your own story. However, we have chosen this theme based on what we are all going through at this moment with the stay-at-home orders. And so you might have an experience that you would love to share, that you would love to develop into a story. What challenges might you have in tying a specific theme to your story? I encourage you to just think as creatively as possible. Think outside the box. It's usually possible to build any story you want to tell around a theme. It's part of the joy and art of storytelling. Okay, so this is the most important thing that I want to share with you today. So I use this prompt as a starting point for all of the stories that I develop for StorySlam. And I do want to give credit where credit is due. I learned this from a storytelling workshop that I took, which was taught by Namisha Ladva. So I just want to acknowledge that. So this prompt really has to do with identity and the different roles that you might identify with. So you see in this first column, it says 4 roles you identify with. So I might write down student, grad student. I might write down partner. I could write friend. And I could write, let's see, theater artist. That's another role I identify with. And then once you have those roles written down, you move on to the next column, which is moments related to the roles. Sometimes it can be helpful to just start off by thinking, I'm thinking of the time when, I was a theater artist and I was auditioning for graduate schools, and that makes me remember this very specific moment that has to do with that role that I identified with. Or I could think of my role as a friend and think of when my best friends and I were planning a trip to Seattle. And so now I have 2 starting points, and then I move on to the relationship. So who were those best friends who I was planning this trip with? Why are these relationships important to me? It can be challenging to describe relationships or describe why you love someone in a story. So I would encourage you here to also just be very specific. And then we move on to what is at stake to gain or lose. Okay, so let's say that I started with my friend role, and then I'm thinking of how my friends and I planned this trip to Seattle that we were planning for a year. And then I identify all of those friends. And then what is at stake to gain or lose? Well, because of the stay-at-home orders, I might lose this opportunity to be with my friends and connect with them and have a vacation that I really wanted to take. And then how and what changed? So that's up to you to identify. So here on this slide, I have some links to some stories if you would like to listen to them. The Moth is sort of like the gold standard of StorySlam. And if you go to their website, you can listen to any number of storytellers share their stories. And this one, Letters from Fairyland, was really lovely and also brief. I think it's a good example if you want to get a bit more familiar with storytelling. And then there's this other story Uh, that's called Accessibility is the New Punk Rock, and it's fantastic. So thank you for watching this short video. I hope that you will contact me to sign up for open workshop hours, which we're holding on Thursdays from 2 to 4 Eastern Standard Time. And I would love to hear what you thought of this. I would love to review any stories you're developing, look anything over. So please reach out to me if you have any questions at all. Thanks a lot.